The battlefield is silent, except for the beating of war drums echoing through the dark forest. A small Roman legion, their red shields glinting under a gray sky, stands shoulder to shoulder. Before them stretches a sea of enemies, wild barbarian warriors screaming, charging, eager to tear them apart. The Romans are outnumbered, surrounded, their fate seemingly sealed. And yet, what happened next has puzzled historians for centuries. Outnumbered, surrounded, doomed. Yet somehow, they walked away as victors. Imagine the chaos of that moment. The clash of iron, the thunder of feet, the roar of men who believed they could overwhelm a smaller force. And then picture the Romans, calm, unbroken, moving like a single body. Shields locked, swords striking in rhythm, each man trusting the one beside him with his very life. To the enemy, it must have felt less like fighting men and more like facing an unstoppable machine. A war engine made of flesh and iron, cold and precise, never hesitating, never breaking. This is the mystery of Rome. They were not always the largest army, nor the most experienced at the start. But time and again, from dusty deserts to frozen forests, they crushed enemies who by all logic should have defeated them. How did they do it? Was it their discipline, drilled into them through brutal training? Was it their brilliant strategies, reshaping the art of war itself? Or was it something far darker, hidden in the way Rome demanded loyalty and obedience? History remembers the Roman army not simply as soldiers, but as an unstoppable force. And tonight, we will step into their world, uncover their secrets, and ask the question that still haunts us. What made them nearly impossible to defeat? Rome was not born strong. It was forged in blood and humiliation. Long before it became the mighty empire we imagine, Rome was just a struggling city among many, fighting for survival in the shadow of more powerful neighbors. Its early history was marked not by glory, but by crushing defeats that should have ended its story before it even began. The Etruscans to the north, the Samnites in the mountains, and countless rival tribes all tested Rome, and often Rome failed. Cities were burned, armies were slaughtered, and citizens were forced to live with the shame of defeat. But here lies the difference that would define Rome forever. Where others accepted loss, Rome turned humiliation into fuel. Every setback became a lesson. Every defeat carved discipline deeper into their bones. The Romans studied their enemies, adapted their weapons, and restructured their armies. When the Samnites outmaneuvered them in the mountains, Rome learned to fight on rugged terrain. When the Etruscans overwhelmed them with discipline, Rome built a harsher system of order within their ranks. Defeat was never the end. It was the teacher that forged them into something more relentless with every battle. This was the seed of the Roman military system, resilience born from pain. Soldiers were not allowed to think of themselves as individuals, but as parts of a greater whole. Discipline was enforced with punishments so severe that cowardice or disobedience could cost a man his life. And yet, this very cruelty created an unshakable unity. The enemies of Rome could never understand it. They fought as warriors, brave, fierce, but often alone in their glory. Rome fought as a single body, every man's strength tied to the one beside him. Their origin was not nobility or destiny, it was survival. Rome bled, Rome stumbled, but Rome never forgot. And in that endless cycle of failure and adaptation, a monster was born, an army that would one day conquer the world. Discipline was the lifeblood of the Roman army, the unseen force that made ordinary men into something far greater. From the moment a recruit joined the legions, his old life ended. He was no longer just a farmer, a craftsman, or a citizen. He was reshaped, physically, mentally, and emotionally, until he belonged not to himself, but to Rome. Training was relentless. Days began before sunrise with long marches in full armor, followed by drills so exhausting that men often collapsed where they stood. Every motion, every formation, every strike of the sword had to be perfected until it became instinct. Mistakes were not tolerated, because in battle, mistakes meant death, not just for one man, but for the entire unit. And when training alone did not instill obedience, punishment did. Roman commanders were merciless in their enforcement of order. A soldier who abandoned his post, who showed cowardice, or who disobeyed commands could face brutal consequences. Sometimes, an entire unit would suffer if one man faltered, ensuring that every soldier understood his failure would bring pain upon his brothers. This harsh system created loyalty not out of kindness, but out of necessity. Each man's survival depended on the discipline of all. It was here that the Romans became something terrifying. To break one Roman was nothing. To break the legion was impossible. Enemies often faced men who looked human, but fought like parts of a single machine. They advanced together, shields locked, steps in perfect rhythm. Every sword strike timed with deadly precision. Other armies fought with passion, with bravery, with the wild courage of individual warriors seeking glory. The Romans fought differently. They fought as one body, one will, one unstoppable force. Against such unity, even the fiercest warriors found their courage turning into fear. This machine of discipline was Rome's greatest weapon, sharper than any sword, stronger than any shield. And it was this weapon that transformed their legions into the nightmare of every enemy who dared to stand before them. Strategy and innovation were the sharp edges of Rome's sword. If discipline was the foundation of the army, then strategy was the brilliance that made it unstoppable. The Romans did not simply fight. They studied, they adapted, and they perfected the art of war in ways their enemies could scarcely imagine. The first, and perhaps greatest innovation, was the legion itself. Most armies in the ancient world relied on rigid formations like the Greek phalanx, a wall of spears that was powerful but clumsy. Once broken, it collapsed entirely. Rome took this idea and transformed it into something far more flexible. The legion was not one great mass of soldiers, but a series of smaller units, maniples and cohorts, that could move independently and yet fight as one. This allowed Rome to adapt to the battlefield in real time. Hills, forests, narrow passes, places where other armies stumbled. The Romans flowed like water, adjusting formation and strategy to fit the ground beneath their feet. The enemy might expect one line of defense, but Rome could shift, bend, or encircle without losing its unity. But Rome's genius was not confined to the battlefield alone. Their engineering gave them an unmatched advantage long before swords were drawn. They built roads that stretched across continents, allowing their armies to move faster than their enemies could prepare. Siege weapons rolled across those same roads, devastating walls that once seemed indestructible. Their camps, built with mathematical precision, could rise in a single night, fortresses of earth and wood that turned temporary halts into strongholds. No matter where the legion marched, they carried Rome with them, order, protection, and the power to outlast any foe. And yet, perhaps the deadliest Roman weapon was not steel or stone, it was their adaptability. Unlike other empires, Rome never dismissed its enemies as inferior. Every enemy taught them a lesson, and each lesson made them deadlier. When they faced the Samnites, they learned mountain warfare. When Hannibal's elephants crushed their ranks, they adapted with new tactics and formations. When the Gauls overwhelmed them with sheer ferocity, Rome hardened its discipline even further. If you won against Rome once, you would never win again. They would return, stronger, wiser, and more ruthless, until your victory became nothing but the memory of a doomed hope. This was Rome's true brilliance. They were not bound by tradition or arrogance. They stole the best ideas from everyone they fought: Greek naval tactics, Carthaginian war strategies, even barbarian weapons, and turned them into Roman tools. To fight Rome was to sharpen Rome. Every battle, even in defeat, was a stepping stone that made them greater to their enemies. It must have felt like fighting an immortal beast. Wound it once, and it returned with new armor. Crush it today, and tomorrow it came back with weapons designed to counter your very strength. And with every war, every adaptation, every lesson written in blood, Rome climbed higher, becoming not just a power, but the power. This was the brilliance that terrified the ancient world. Not just their swords, not just their numbers, but their ability to change, to evolve, to turn every weakness into strength. The Roman army was not just built on discipline. It was sharpened by strategy and innovation until it became something far greater, a machine that learned from every foe, and in learning, became nearly impossible to defeat. Beneath the armor and the endless drills, there was something deeper that bound the Roman legions together: brotherhood. A soldier in Rome's army was never truly alone. He ate with his comrades, marched with them, slept beside them in the camp, and bled with them on the battlefield. Victories were shared, and so were punishments. If one faltered, all suffered. If one triumphed, the glory belonged to the legion, not the man. Over time, this created a bond stronger than steel, a loyalty that no enemy could sever. They did not fight for gold alone. They fought for each other, for Rome itself. When a legion advanced, it was not just the discipline of training that kept them steady. It was trust. Each man knew that the shield beside him would not break, that the sword behind him would strike if he fell. Their lives were woven together so tightly that to betray the legion was worse than death. For some, it was Rome's glory that inspired them. For others, it was simply the faces of the brothers at their side. And this was the secret that terrified Rome's enemies. Warriors could be brave, but warriors fought for themselves, for personal honor, or for fleeting triumph. The Roman soldier fought for something far greater. He fought for his brothers, and through them, for the eternal city that demanded his loyalty. This loyalty made them unbreakable. Even in the darkest moments, when the odds seemed impossible, the Roman legion held firm, not because every man was fearless, but because every man would rather die than abandon the one beside him. And that bond, forged in hardship and sacrifice, was the true heart of Rome's unstoppable power. To understand the terror of the Roman army, one must listen not to Rome, but to her enemies. The Gauls spoke of men who advanced like a wall of iron, their red shields gleaming as if the gods themselves marched with them. The Germans, wild and fearless in battle, admitted that for all their strength, they could not shatter the Roman line. Again and again, their furious charges broke upon the legion like waves against stone. And the Carthaginians, proud masters of the Mediterranean, watched with growing dread as Rome rose from every defeat stronger than before. Yet among all Rome's enemies, one name stands apart: Hannibal of Carthage. He was the rare general who truly challenged the Roman machine. With cunning unmatched, he led his army across the Alps, bringing elephants over snowbound peaks where no one believed an army could pass. At Cannae, he crushed a Roman force twice his size, surrounding them so completely that tens of thousands died in a single day. For a moment, it seemed as if Rome had finally met its end. But even he, the greatest of their enemies, could not destroy the Roman machine. Rome absorbed the blow, staggering but not falling. They studied Hannibal's brilliance, adapted their tactics, and refused to surrender. For nearly 2 decades he haunted Italy, yet the Roman legions endured, waiting, learning, preparing for the moment to strike back. And when they did, Carthage burned. This was the fate of all who faced Rome. Victory against them was never final, never safe. Because Rome turned every wound into a weapon, and every defeat into a future victory. Against such a force, even the bravest enemies found their courage turning into fear. For centuries, the Roman army seemed invincible, but even the strongest steel begins to crack when stretched too thin. As Rome's empire expanded across continents, its legions were no longer defending a single city. They were holding together a vast world. From the deserts of the east to the forests of the north, soldiers were forced to fight endless wars. And the strain began to show. The citizen soldiers who once marched with pride, bound by loyalty to Rome, became harder to find. The empire grew too large, and too many Romans preferred comfort over hardship. To fill the gaps, Rome turned to mercenaries, men who fought not for brotherhood or loyalty, but for coin. These soldiers could wield weapons, but they lacked the spirit that had once made the legions unbreakable. The machine that had conquered the world was slowly rusting from within. Discipline faltered. Commanders began to use their armies not for Rome, but for personal power. Civil wars tore the empire apart as generals turned their legions against one another, shattering the unity that had once terrified enemies. The mighty roads that carried Rome's armies now carried them into battles against their own countrymen. The truth became undeniable. The greatest enemy of Rome was never outside. It was Rome itself. All the discipline, the strategy, the brotherhood that once made them unstoppable was consumed by greed, corruption, and betrayal. The army that no foreign power could break was undone by the very empire it had built. And so, the cracks widened. until even the strongest walls of Rome could no longer hold so. What made the Roman army nearly unbeatable? Was it their iron discipline, drilled into every man until obedience became second nature? Was it the strategies and innovations that allowed them to adapt to any battlefield, to any enemy? Or was it something far more subtle? The fear they planted in the hearts of men long before the swords ever clashed? Perhaps it was all of these together, a perfect storm of loyalty, power, and ruthless determination that created an army unlike any the world had ever seen. For centuries, they stood as the ultimate force, the living embodiment of Rome's might. Enemies feared them, allies relied on them, and history remembers them as almost invincible. But in the end, even they could not escape the one truth no empire can deny. The cracks did not come from the outside, but from within. Corruption, division, and complacency destroyed what no foreign power could. And that is the lesson their story leaves us with. Even the strongest can fall. Even the seemingly untouchable can crumble. The Roman army was more than a fighting force. It was a symbol of endurance, loyalty, and power. Yet their fall reminds us of how fragile greatness truly is. I leave you with this question. If such an unstoppable army could collapse, what power today believes itself untouchable? And when its cracks appear, will history repeat itself?